Her neighbor smirked and said, "You'll be dead before winter." Margot Ellis, widowed planner and ex-friend of his late wife, didn't blink. Dean Kessler once shared bonfires and fence lines with her. Now he was dumping trash, firing rifles, and stealing inches of land. By fall, she owned his cabin, redrew the map, and erased his name in court ink. He broke the boundary. She made it permanent. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The axe was heavier this year. Margot Ellis could feel it in her shoulders, her wrists, even in the way her breath caught when she lifted another log onto the splitting block. The early morning air still held the bite of last night's frost, and her gloves, stiff from age, creaked with each movement. She paused to catch her breath, a wisp of vapor escaping her lips, and leaned on the axe handle. Behind her, a crow cawed from the bare pine. Just beyond the wire fence, Dean Kessler's boots crunched on gravel. "Well, would you look at that?" he said, voice lazy with beer and a smirk. "You'll be dead before winter, lady." Margot didn't turn around. She kept her gaze on the half-split log. Dean chuckled, a dry, throaty sound. "Guess I'll get a better view once you're gone." He tapped the rim of his beer can against the fence post like it was a toast, then kept walking. She waited until his footsteps faded. The log cracked under her next strike with a clean, angry snap. That night, the wind hissed against the windows like it was trying to remind her of something. Margot lit the old oil lamp on the kitchen table and opened the bottom drawer of Ray's desk, the one she hadn't touched since he died. She found it beneath faded tax receipts and a bundle of architectural drafts. A sealed envelope marked in Ray's handwriting, "M. Only open if you're stuck." She stared at it for a long time before opening it. The paper inside was soft with time, folded carefully. "You were always the sharpest one. If things get ugly with Dean, don't forget how much land actually touches ours. Look in the freezer, bottom drawer." Margot swallowed hard. Her fingers trembled, not from fear, but from something older. Anger, maybe. Or memory. She stood, crossed the kitchen, and circled a date on the hanging wall calendar in red ink. October 2nd, reassess estate. The pen squeaked as she pressed too hard. She didn't care. 2 days later, Lori arrived from Seattle in her rust-spotted Subaru, all fleece and frustration. "God, this road gets worse every time." Margot smiled, handed her a mug of tea. "You just get softer." "Yeah, well, my chiropractor agrees." They sat on the porch, steam curling from their cups. The wind picked up, and with it came a familiar sound, a plastic bag flapping. Lori turned. "Oh, for crying out loud, is that Dean's crap again?" Margot followed her gaze. A torn garbage sack from across the fence had spilled into her yard. Fast food wrappers, broken beer cans, something oily and leaking. Lori stood. "I'll clean it." "No," Margot said firmly. "Let it sit." Lori raised an eyebrow. "Since when do you let trash fester?" Margot set her cup down slowly. "Since it started coming with fingerprints." That night, Margot sat alone at the kitchen table, the house silent except for the steady tick of the old brass clock. She opened a new notebook. On the first page, she wrote a single line in block letters, "Receipts to keep." Then, she turned off the light and walked to the freezer. She knelt, opened the bottom drawer. Her breath caught. The envelope was still there, just like Ray had said, and just as she reached for it, headlights washed through the window. A slow-moving truck, Dean's truck, driving past, not stopping, just enough to remind her he was close. Too close. Margot didn't move until the lights faded into black. Then she whispered to the empty house, "This time, I bury you with paperwork." The next morning, Margot rolled out the county survey map across her kitchen table, weighing the edges with Ray's old drafting weights. Light from the east window hit the yellowed paper at an angle, revealing faint pencil marks. Notes, initials, a mess of overlapping lines. It looked less like a map and more like a fight between men who hated boundaries. She slid her glasses up the bridge of her nose and traced the borders with a pen, lips pressed thin. Dean Kessler didn't own his land outright, not in any clean way. There were breaks, she could see them now. His supposed 20 acres were scattered, filed under different LLCs with names that reeked of camouflage: Granite Pines Holdings, Cedar Knot, Old Timber Creek LLC. Ray always said people hid things when they feared being seen. At noon, Margot brushed the crumbs from her sweater and drove into town. The courthouse was mostly empty, just the sound of a copier humming and the soft squeak of chair wheels behind glass partitions. Blake looked up as she entered. 40-something, cardigan over a county-issued button-down, and a face that always seemed half distracted but never missed a detail. "Ms. Ellis, haven't seen you since April. Everything okay?" She set a printout on the counter, cropped satellite images from 3 winters ago, Dean's fence line barely visible under snow. "I need parcel records on this area, historical filings, ownership transfers, and anything tax delinquent since 2007. Blake's brow lifted slightly. "That's a deep pull." "I brought tea." He smiled. "You always did play the long game." Within an hour, they were elbow-deep in archive boxes and dusty legal pads. It was Blake who found the easement error, tucked in a scan from 2008, signed by a notary who'd long since retired. "You're gonna love this," he said, tapping the screen. "The access road to his backup cabin? He doesn't technically own it. It crosses a parcel that defaulted 3 years ago. No transfer recorded." Margot's fingers twitched. "What's the status on that parcel now?" Blake turned to another terminal. "Tax delinquent. No payments in 18 months. Should have gone to auction last quarter, but someone pushed a hold. Probably him." She didn't say anything. Just stood there, reading and rereading the screen. Quiet title. Ray's voice echoed in her memory. Always a chess move ahead. She left the courthouse and drove straight to Sharon's office, 2 stories above the hardware store. The lawyer had silver hair like wire and eyes that didn't blink unless it was worth the effort. "I want to file a research intent on that parcel," Margot said. "Quiet title if the records check out." Sharon listened, thumb tapping against her coffee mug. "You're not just poking the bear. You're walking into his den." Margot folded her hands. "He's the one who started clawing." Sharon leaned back and gave the smallest of nods. "Then we move fast." By the time Margot pulled back into her driveway that evening, the sun had dipped behind the ridge. The cold was coming in early. Again. She stepped out of the car and heard it. Thumping bass, a far-off cheer, the unmistakable crack of a rifle echoing off the trees. Dean was throwing another one of his weekend tantrums. Music blared from his side of the woods. Pickup trucks lined his gravel driveway like a tailgate party at the gates of hell. Floodlights lit up the side of his cabin like it was a stage. Someone let off another shot, followed by laughter. Margot didn't flinch. She stepped inside, locked the door, and picked up the phone. "Ranger Station," came the voice on the other end. She spoke calmly, without emotion. "Multiple shots fired, possible unregistered activity off the Timberline turn. Lot 32. You might want to send someone before it becomes a search party." She hung up. No name, no fuss. Then she pulled down the attic ladder, climbed the narrow steps, and brought down another box of Ray's maps. Inside the top folder was a diagram marked in his bold black strokes, boundary lines, elevation marks, easements, and something circled in red, a small hand-drawn X, right where Dean's second cabin sat. She didn't need to know what it meant yet, only that it was already hers. The cold bit harder that week. Morning frost painted the porch railings like chalk lines, and Margot's breath came in clouds even inside the kitchen. She opened the freezer to grab a soup container and paused. There, behind an old ice pack and a forgotten sleeve of English muffins, was a flat white envelope in a Ziploc bag. She pulled it out slowly, the corners stiff with ice crystals. Ray's handwriting again, blockier this time, rushed. The top read, "Backup, if Kessler ever circles back." Her thumb trembled as she opened it. Inside, a folded sheaf of surveyor notes dated 15 years ago. Lot elevations, parcel lines, notations in Ray's shorthand, and at the bottom, a handwritten addendum clipped to the main page. Client D. Kessler, requested informal review of old timber split, never paid invoice, advised not to file under Ellis name due to conflict. Marked access path discrepancies for future legal clarity. Ray had worked on Dean's land, quietly, and Dean had stiffed him. Margot stared at the papers, heart thudding. It wasn't just pettiness now, it was leverage, clear and legal. She walked it straight into Sharon's office that afternoon. Sharon didn't speak for a long while. She read, then reread the notes. When she finally looked up, her face was stone. "This is a goldmine. He used your husband's credentials to skirt a real survey, then left you holding the bag." Margot nodded. "Can we use it?" "We're already filing on the easement. This lets us double down. Assert boundary ambiguity, claim historical conflict of interest, and flag his title for review. Will it hold?" Sharon tapped the packet once against her desk. "It won't have to. It'll slow him down long enough for us to plant the flag." That night, Margot pulled her heavy coat from the closet and stepped out into the dark. The air smelled of pine and smoke, and something sour from Dean's side. Burned meat, maybe, or spilled fuel. From her back porch, she could see the red blink of Dean's motion light flickering behind the trees. Her eyes narrowed. She walked the perimeter slowly, taking photographs on her old Nikon of where his woodpile had slumped onto her side of the line, where an old gutter leaned into her drainage trench. Encroachments. Every inch mattered now. The next morning, Lori called from Seattle. "You're getting mail from the clerk's office?" Margot smiled faintly. "Blake's faster than he looks." "Also," Lori said, chewing something, "your neighbor's a pig. Google Street View updated. His cabin looks like it belongs on a meth docuseries. Want me to catalog anything?" "Start with the fence line and the trash barrels near the property pin." "Say less. I made a spreadsheet." Margot chuckled quietly. "Of course you did." Later that day, Margot drove into town for salt and lamp oil. She parked near the co-op, barely out of the car when Dean Kessler stepped out from behind a beat-up SUV, drink in hand, smile already curdling. "Well, well," he said, stepping closer. "Still breathing?" "Miracle." Margot didn't flinch. "Planning to outlive my enemies." Dean's smile faltered, just slightly. "You ought to be careful what you dig up. Lot of people don't like mess stirred." She looked at him like she'd look at a muddy boot print on her clean floor. "That why you skipped the survey fee?" His face twitched, just enough for her to see it. She walked past him without another word. By sundown, she was back in the cabin, feeding logs into the stove and listening to Ray's old jazz station crackle through the static. On the table beside her sat the Nikon, memory card removed, already uploading to a shared folder Lori had labeled M. Ellis V. Assholes. As she sat back in the armchair, the phone buzzed once. A message from Sharon. Claim drafted. Filing tomorrow. Quiet title. Access route. Kessler's cabin just became contestable. Margot sipped her tea, eyes on the darkening woods outside. Somewhere out there, Dean was still throwing beer cans at his problems. She was throwing deeds. The email came at 6:04 a.m., just as Margot was pouring her first cup of coffee. The subject line was bland. Notice, upcoming foreclosure auction, county assessor's office. But the contents made her still hand tighten around the mug. Parcel number 347B, 1.1 acres, bordered her eastern tree line, legally owned by Granite Pines Holdings, LLC, which she now knew was just one of Dean's aliases in legal camouflage. She hit print, slid the paper into her red file folder marked K, and picked up the phone. Blake answered on the second ring. "Early bird. Just confirming what I saw in the notice. That acre behind his well. It's in the next auction?" Blake sounded impressed. "You move faster than most developers. Yeah, it cleared delinquency. No legal challenges filed. It's eligible." "And if I were to bid?" Margot asked. "You'd need a front. If it goes to auction and he sees your name—" "It won't," she interrupted. "We'll go through the Ellis Preservation Trust." She heard him tap on a keyboard. "All right, but you'll want Sharon to review. It's a tight window." "She's already looped in." There was a pause, then a small chuckle. "Margot, remind me never to live next to you." By afternoon, the paperwork was rolling. Margot sat in Sharon's office as the lawyer slid the final forms across the desk. Her nails were painted the same hard crimson as her reading glasses. "You now legally own the acre that feeds water to his main cabin," Sharon said, signing with a firm stroke. "He doesn't know it yet, but that's the point. Margot nodded. I want a fence installed along the full boundary. Steel posts, pressure-treated, survey correct. Sharon smirked. You want him to feel it. I want him to understand it. She left the office and made 2 calls, one to the fence company, the other to Lori. When the crew arrived 2 days later, Dean was on his porch shirtless, barking into a cell phone. His eyes tracked the workers unloading posts and digging holes, confusion giving way to rising fury. He crossed the tree line fast, boots crunching over brittle pine needles. Hey, what the hell is this? Margot stepped out from her cabin, coat buttoned, clipboard in hand. Dean jabbed a finger toward the surveyor. Is this some kind of joke? No joke, Margot said evenly. You're standing on my land. The hell I am. This is my line. I had it marked 15 years ago. By Ray, she said, letting the words hang. Which you never paid for. He blinked. His breath steamed in the cold. You're bluffing, she tilted her head. You're trespassing. The foreman held up the signed work order. Says Ellis Preservation Trust owns this parcel now. We got the county map update and everything. Dean's eyes darted from the papers to Margot's calm face, then back to the growing fence line cutting across his view of the mountain. The posts stood tall, clean, straight, permanent. He stepped back, jaw flexing. This isn't over. No, Margot agreed, but that part of the yard is. Dean turned, cursing under his breath as he stalked off. A beer can rolled off his porch steps as he slammed the door behind him. Later, Lori FaceTimed from Seattle, hair in a messy bun, blue light from her monitors washing her face. I saw the update, she grinned. You got the acre, and he just lost water rights? Informally, but it's going to hurt, Lori whistled. He has no idea what just happened, does he? Margot looked out the window. The new fence posts stood like quiet sentinels against the gray hillside. No, she said, but the mountain does. She reached for her pen and added another line in her red notebook under receipts to keep. Parcel 347B acquired. Fence line drawn. Watch for retaliation. Outside, the wind picked up again, but this time it didn't feel cold. It felt like momentum. The sound of stakes being driven into frozen earth echoed like slow gunfire through the pines. Margot stood at the edge of the ridge, arms crossed against the cold, watching the surveyor's team work. The lead, young, polite, and meticulous, checked the GPS reader strapped to his chest, then drove a steel marker into the dirt with a clean swing of the mallet. It landed just 5 feet from Dean's tool shed. Marker 3. The surveyor called. This is the official northeast corner, GPS locked and filed? Margot nodded. Paint it bright. Red. I want it visible even in snow. He dipped the tip of the rebar in fluorescent spray paint, then logged the coordinates. Dean's shed was crooked, sun-warped, and patched with mismatched plywood. From where she stood, Margot could see the corner of its base extending just past the line, her line now. An hour later, she heard the inevitable roar of Dean's truck tearing up the gravel. It stopped short. He flung the door open, barely closed it behind him before storming toward the marker with a crowbar in hand. What the hell is this? He spat. Some joke? The surveyor didn't flinch. Official county boundary per your neighbor's ownership claim, records confirmed, filed this morning. Dean's boots crunched as he marched toward the stake, then stopped when he saw the fluorescent red. That's my damn shed. It's not on your damn land, Margot said from the porch. Her voice was calm, arms still folded. You built over the line, unpermitted. Dean turned, his face flushed beneath his scruff. You think you're gonna tell me where my land ends? Sharon's letter arrived 2 days later. Hand-delivered, notarized, and stapled with a copy of the new GIS map. It was simple. Notice to remove structure encroachment. Parcel 347B, owned by Ellis Preservation Trust. 7 days to comply. Dean didn't take it well. He tore down the marker that afternoon. Margot wasn't home when it happened. She was at the clinic for a routine blood draw, but her trail cam was. Mounted behind a birch, motion-triggered, it captured everything. Dean yanking the stake from the ground, dragging it behind him like a trophy, spitting into the dirt where it had stood. She watched the footage later that night with a glass of wine and no expression. The next morning, she slid a USB drive across Sharon's desk. "Vandalism clear and recorded," Sharon said, reviewing the footage. "That shed just became a liability. His, not ours." Margot nodded. "He thinks breaking a stick ends a boundary." Sharon was already dialing the county ranger station. By Friday, the report was logged. Blake called before lunch. "I heard about the incident," he said, his tone careful. Ranger filed the vandalism report under documented retaliation. "That's rare." "Good," Margot said, "because I want it added to the title file." Blake hesitated. "That brings it into court territory. Once it's in county records, there's no walking it back." "That's the idea." Later that evening, Margot stepped outside as the first real snow began to fall. It came light, brushing over her boots, dusting the roofline. In the silence, the boundary looked clearer than ever, the fresh red spray on the remaining markers glowing faintly under her porch light. Dean's cabin was quiet. Too quiet. She opened her notebook, added 2 lines, stake removed by other party. Title integrity compromised, awaiting court date. The pen scratched with a satisfying finality, and then her phone buzzed. It was an alert from Lori's shared drive, a new upload. She clicked it. The video loaded slowly. Dean, earlier that afternoon, pacing in his driveway, screaming into his phone. The audio barely picked it up over the wind, but one line came through clearly. "She doesn't get it. Once I tear that damn shed down, there's no record she can hold." Margot smiled coldly. He had no idea how much stronger her case just became. The first birch fell in the spring of 19. Margot remembered the snap. Clean, brutal, final. Ray had planted that tree the year they moved in, his way of softening the sightlines, as he used to say. Dean, then still pretending to be neighborly, had mumbled something about opening up the view. By the time Margot came home from town, 3 of the oldest trunks were lying in a pile, cut with a chainsaw that reeked of beer and bravado. She never forgot that week. Now, standing at the edge of her property with pruning shears in hand and the sun low behind her, she stared at the tangled brush that bordered Dean's gravel path. Shrubs, saplings, unruly limbs grown fat with years of neglect, enough growth to muffle a house from the road, enough to protect a man like Dean from the eyes of future buyers. She clicked the shears once, sharp, clean. Then she went to work. 3 days later, a 20-foot-wide swath was cleared, opening the sightline from the county road straight to Dean's peeling paint, his sunken porch, his rusting satellite dish, angled crooked like a broken antenna on a dead world. Lori FaceTimed during the cleanup. "You're really doing it. I see the pile behind you." "I'm just making the landscape honest," Margot said. "Feels surgical." "Good." That evening, she installed the motion lights. 2, one facing the path leading from her cabin, the other aimed directly at the strip she'd just cleared. "Bear deterrent," she explained to no one, hammering the base plate into the post. "Night vision, too." When the sun dipped, they clicked on automatically, bright white beams slicing the dusk. Dean's window lit up seconds later, then closed again. Hard. The next morning, Lori sent a file. "Been digging," she said. "Dean's LLCs aren't just sloppy, they're broke." The spreadsheet loaded on Margot's screen like a war map. Granite Pines Holdings, 2 federal tax liens, Old Timber Creek LLC, mechanics lien from a failed roofing contractor, Red Clay View, LLC, suspended in Idaho and Montana for failure to report income. "Stacking paper," Lori added. "Just not the kind you want." Margot leaned back, her tea forgotten. "How fast can Sharon file?" "Already pinged her. She's on it." By week's end, Sharon had drafted the lien. Quiet. Lethal. Claim for damages due to encroachment, unauthorized structure, and retaliatory vandalism. Filed against Dean's primary holding, the lot his main cabin sat on. "Once this hits the register," Sharon said over the phone, "he'll need to clear it before any sale. Transfer." Or Refi Margot scribbled another entry in her notebook. "Liens on file. Visibility reset. Buyer deterrent locked." The next morning, a white SUV with out-of-state plates pulled up to Dean's driveway. A couple stepped out, mid-40s, walking slow, looking around. Dean emerged shirtless again, gesturing wildly, laughing too loud. The woman looked toward the road and saw Margot's cleared tree line. Her face changed. Then the lights clicked on. Both of them turned sharply. Margot watched from her porch as they got back into the car and drove away. Dean looked up at the sky and roared. That night, Margot sat at her kitchen table with Ray's old lantern flickering and a folded printout of Dean's lean stack spread beside her. The trail cam caught something again. Dean stumbling through the brush after dark, flashlight in one hand, bottle in the other. The motion lights triggered as he got too close. He flinched like he'd been struck. Margot rewound and played it again. And again. She poured another glass of wine and hit save. Then her phone vibrated. A text from Blake. He called the assessor's office, wanted to know if a lien can be undone by apology. We said no. Margot smiled. The trees were gone. But the roots were hers now. Margot first noticed the sudden hush of Dean's property on a Tuesday afternoon. No shouting, no revving engines, not even a beer can clinking on the porch. Just an unnatural quiet, the kind of quiet that meant a performance was being staged. By Thursday, it was confirmed. A cluster of unfamiliar cars idled at the edge of his gravel drive. A private showing sign had been duct-taped to a tree, barely covering a faded "No Trespassing" plaque. Margot changed into her town clothes, dark jeans, waxed coat, neat scarf, and tucked her hair beneath a soft knit cap. Then she walked down the ridge. Dean didn't recognize her at first. He was too busy flashing fake warmth at a trio of buyers from Washington. 2 couples and a solo investor type with wraparound sunglasses and polished boots that had clearly never seen real mud. "This is your full mountain privacy zone," Dean boomed. "Year-round well access, 0 HOA, and room to expand. You can't get this kind of footprint up in Sandpoint anymore." Margot stepped up onto the gravel with a light smile. "Oh, good," she said sweetly. "Still showing the place without disclosing the liens?" Dean froze for half a second. "I'm sorry. Who are you?" One of the women turned. "Are you a neighbor?" "I am. Emsa Ellis," she said, extending a hand to no one in particular. "Just popped over to say hello, thought I'd meet the folks possibly moving in." Dean stepped between her and the others. "You need to leave. This is private." "Sure, of course." Margot nodded as she strolled slowly toward the edge of the cabin. She gestured lightly with a gloved hand. "Just thought someone might want to ask about the open septic vent out back, or the fact that his well access cuts across a parcel currently tied up in county court." The investor frowned. "Wait, what?" Dean's smile turned to stone. "She's just bitter. Old neighbor feud. You know how that gets." "Nothing bitter," Margot replied. "Just cautious. You'd be surprised how many mountain cabins around here sit on shaky title." The woman from earlier pulled out her phone. A moment later she muttered, "Court filing. It's online." The second man, quiet until now, spoke. "You sure that septic's up to code? Smells like gray water." Right then, as if staged by the mountain gods themselves, a biker buzzed by on the newly cleared county shoulder, engine loud, jacket catching the breeze. He shouted over the rumble, "Nice trail, Ellis." The woman turned. "Ellis?" Margot smiled. "Ellis Preservation Trust. I've been here a while." Dean's eyes were dark now, fury building beneath the surface. "Get off my property." "I'm on the road easement," she said calmly. "Just observing." She turned to go, then paused by the hood of the investor's Range Rover. From her coat pocket, she pulled a small white card and placed it gently beneath the wiper blade. Clean serif font. No fluff. M. Ellis Preservation Trust Land Use Advisor, Coeur d'Alene Region. Dean stormed toward her, but one of the buyers intercepted him with a raised hand. "This isn't going to work for us," the woman said flatly. "Too much heat. We're not looking for a fight. We're looking for a place to decompress." "You want the mountain life," Margot said softly. "You ought to know where the fault lines are." Dean shouted something behind her as she walked back up the ridge, something about her being a liar, a witch, a lunatic, but the words didn't land. They bounced off the light snowfall, faded before they reached her coat. She made it back to her porch, just as Blake's name lit up her phone. "Voicemail." Hey, just FYI, 3 title search inquiries just hit Dean's lot. Your little plan's got legs. People are talking. Margot stood by the edge of the porch, watching the taillights disappear down Dean's drive. The wind curled up the slope behind her like applause. And the card she left behind? She had more of them, a whole stack. The locals heard him before they saw him. Dean's voice carried across the gas station lot like a diesel engine with a loose belt, grinding, persistent, impossible to ignore. "I got nothing but wet pine and bark rot," he griped, slamming the tailgate of his truck. "Season ain't even peaked and I'm already out. Nobody sells dry anymore. You gotta be a damn millionaire just to heat your home now." 2 mechanics leaned on the hood of a dusty Jeep, exchanging looks. One sipped coffee, the other stared into his cup like it might save him from joining the conversation. Inside the station, Margot kept her face down beneath the brim of her hat as she paid for propane. The cashier gave her a tight smile. "Town sure feels smaller lately," he said quietly. She didn't reply, just tapped her card, grabbed her receipt, and walked out. By the time she returned home, she'd already made the call. The delivery came 2 days later. No invoice, no sender name. A flatbed Ford pulled up at Dean's property line and dumped a full cord of firewood onto a blue tarp. Dean stepped onto his porch in his usual morning uniform, bare feet, boxers, and an undersized thermal tee, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "What the hell?" The driver waved once, shrugged, and climbed back into the cab. Dust kicked up as he pulled away. Dean stared at the pile for a few seconds, then let out a grunt that might have passed for laughter. He dragged a few logs toward his shed, the fresh wood leaving reddish streaks across his arms. Margot watched from behind the curtain, lips tight. The ivy bark had been carefully mixed in, harmless to burn but potent on contact. Ray once taught her that certain vines cling to firewood in a way that's nearly invisible to the untrained eye. Nature's fingerprint, he'd called it. By Friday, Dean hadn't been seen in town. By Sunday, Blake called. "You hear about the rash?" Margot sipped her tea. "Should I have?" "His arms are covered. Face, too. Doc at urgent care told my cousin it looked like chemical exposure, but Dean's claiming it's allergies." "Well," Margot said, "we're all sensitive to something." She hung up and dialed Sharon next. "We ready to file the health complaint?" Sharon didn't miss a beat. "Already drafted. Septic tank hasn't been registered since 2014. We can file it under nuisance violation and request emergency inspection." "And who triggers the inspection?" "Blake, if he gets a tip." An hour later, a quiet alert hit the county inbox. Dean's tank had overflowed last spring during snowmelt, captured in Lori's spreadsheet with geotagged photos. By Tuesday, a county vehicle rolled up Dean's drive. Red tape was tied around the tank entrance by noon. Margot watched from her porch as Dean, still blotchy and scratching, argued with the inspector. His voice cracked as he pointed at the woods, the tank, the house. "This is harassment. I've lived here 20 years. The inspector didn't flinch. "And the law's been around longer than that." Margot closed the curtain. That night, as she sat beside the fire, a knock came at the door. Not many people knocked on her door anymore. She opened it cautiously. The man was mid-30s, wind-chapped, with a fleece jacket and a notepad in hand. "Hi," he said. "You Margot Ellis?" She hesitated. "Depends who's asking." "Name's Kyle Mercer. I write for North Range Quarterly. I'm doing a story on boundary disputes up here. Real estate, land fights, title fraud. Your name keeps coming up." Margot said nothing. "I'm not looking to cause trouble," he added. "But I've talked to a few county officials. One of them called you a legal glacier. I'd like to know what that means." She stepped back slightly, eyes narrowed. "Come back tomorrow," she said. "Bring boots, and questions that matter." He smiled. "Fair enough." As she closed the door, the fire cracked behind her. She turned and wrote a new line in her notebook. Now they're watching. Time to control the story. The envelope sat unopened on the mantel for over a year, Ray's handwriting crisp on the front. "Activate only if the wolves circle." Margot opened it the morning after Kyle's visit. The mountain air felt colder than usual, the clouds sitting lower against the ridgeline, pressing down like a warning. She sliced the seal with her thumbnail and pulled out the documents. Ray had drafted it himself, tight, professional, bulletproof. A clause buried in the founding terms of the Ray Ellis Foundation Trust, first right of refusal on any adjacent parcels provided legal interest had been established. And thanks to Dean's tangled web of liens, violations, and retaliatory filings, Margot's interest wasn't just legal, it was documented, notarized, and currently sitting in half a dozen county inboxes. By noon, Sharon had everything loaded. He tried to float a refinance on his main parcel. Last week, Sharon said, reviewing her laptop. Rejected. Too many red flags. He's hanging by one thread. You cut it. We own the property. Margot nodded. Do it. The offer went out that afternoon. Formal, binding. The trust would buy the mortgage. Not the land, not yet, but the debt Dean still owed on it. By Tuesday, Dean stormed into Blake's office with a folder of crumpled paperwork and a bleeding scratch down his cheek. You can't let her do this, he barked. Blake didn't blink. It's legal. She's bleeding me dry. Blake glanced at the screen, then back at him. Number, she's paying what you owe. That's how debt works. Dean slammed his fist against the counter, knocking over the stapler. Back at home, Margot was waiting. She knew he'd come. She heard the truck before she saw it, spinning up the gravel, brakes locking just shy of her front step. Dean flung open the door, stormed across the porch, coffee sloshing from a foam cup clenched in one hand. You think this is funny? He snapped. You think this is some goddamn game, Margot? She didn't move, just opened the door slowly, stepped onto the porch, and met him eye to eye. I think this is arithmetic, she said. Debt, interest, enforcement. You're buying my cabin out from under me. I offered market rate, minus what I spent fixing your mess. Dean hurled the coffee. It missed, hitting the porch rail and splattering across the snow-dusted deck. I built that place with my own hands, he screamed. Margot didn't raise her voice. Then you should have read the winter forecast. He stared at her, chest heaving, eyes bloodshot. She saw it then, the shift, the recognition, the rage giving way to something heavier. Defeat. I'm not signing a damn thing, he growled, but his voice cracked halfway through. You won't have to, she replied. The trust owns the note. Default takes care of the rest. He turned, staggered back toward the truck like a man walking through wet concrete. That night, Margot received confirmation from Sharon. Mortgage secured. Transfer finalized. We now hold first position lien on Dean's cabin. Foreclosure window open. A second email followed moments later, from Blake. It's done. Cabin title will transfer by Friday. You just outmaneuvered the last card he had. Margot sat in the dark, the fire glowing low. She ran her hand across Ray's old drafting table, eyes tracing the etched initials in the corner, R+M, 1997. She whispered to the empty house, We got it back. And then she crossed the room, opened her notebook, and wrote the cleanest line yet. Dean Kessler's cabin, acquired via trust. Ownership, absolute. Outside, a fresh snow began to fall, soft, steady, and indifferent. But it landed on her roof now, on her land, on her win. Dean didn't leave quietly. The morning after the title transferred, Margot heard the sound of tires spinning in gravel and knew he'd be back at the courthouse, or the clerk's office, or the diner, shouting into his coffee and gathering whatever broken men still tolerated him. But it wasn't just noise this time. It was spectacle. By noon, a local camera crew stood on his porch, capturing Dean in a flannel jacket and fury. His hands trembled as he waved around a dog-eared eviction notice, ranting about stolen land and corrupt women and county conspiracies. Look at this, he barked. You tell me how this makes sense. Some old widow outlaw steals your land with paperwork and smug tea parties? The anchor, a younger woman in a fleece vest and stiff smile, barely nodded. Her cameraman kept glancing at the firewood pile behind Dean, now half-burned, half-moldering from snow. Margot didn't watch it live. She didn't need to. Instead, she waited until the reporter showed up at her gate, clipboard in hand, forced politeness in her voice. I just want your side of the story, Ms. Ellis. Dean Kessler says... Margot stepped onto the porch, expression still, and handed over the deed. Clean, signed, sealed. The reporter blinked. You actually own it." Margot said nothing, just nodded once. "No comment?" the woman asked, sensing a dead end. "Only the legal one," Margot replied. "You're welcome to quote the county record." The segment aired that night. Short, clinical. The footage of Dean's tantrum cut off mid-sentence. Margot's face never appeared. Just the image of a document under the words, "Ownership confirmed." The next morning, she called Darla. Darla had helped with Ray's things after he passed. She didn't say much, didn't ask for favors, just hauled, hammered, and kept people honest with her silence. When she arrived with the moving van, she didn't even step inside first. "Which room first?" "Main," Margot said. "We'll build it from the bones." The cabin still smelled like smoke and sweat and bitterness. Margot didn't flinch. She opened every window. She let the mountain air come in and take what it needed. Dean, by law, still had 30 days. She wasn't rushing it. She didn't need to. The formal letter had already gone. Out, possession date, December 1st. Until then, he'd live in a ghost. The place no longer belonged to him, and now everyone knew it. 3 days later, Margot dropped a sealed envelope into the outgoing mail at the general store. Inside, a printed schedule of firewood delivery dates for the coming month. No note, just a calendar with a small circle around December 1st. The clerk looked at the address and raised a brow. "Kessler still getting mail?" "For now," Margot said. The afternoon sun hit the porch just right when Lori's car rolled up the drive. She stepped out with a thermos and a grin, camera slung across her chest. "I brought cocoa and a full memory card." Inside the cabin, Darla had already assembled the essentials: a small table, a clean rug, books stacked neatly in the windowsill. The fire was lit, not roaring, but steady. Lori stopped mid-step as she looked around. "This is beautiful, Auntie." Margot didn't speak for a moment. She walked across the room, reached into the last box, and pulled out a frame. Ray, standing on the cabin deck years ago, plans rolled under one arm, sun on his neck. She set it gently on the mantel. "He built the line," she said quietly. "Now I've redrawn it." Outside, Dean's truck was still parked near the road. He hadn't come up the drive all day, just sat there, waiting, losing. Margot watched the smoke from her chimney curl upward, straight, unbothered, permanent. Then she wrote in her notebook, "He's living in his past. I'm already inside the future." The first snowfall after December 1st came in heavy, wet, weighted flakes that blanketed the ridge and quieted even the pine groans. By mid-morning, the gravel drive was gone, the cabin roof thick with white. Dean's truck was gone too. Finally. Margot stood by the window, watching the smoke curl from her chimney, and reached for her notebook. She flipped to the back, to the tab marked Final Steps, and underlined one sentence: "Update the map." By 10, she was in the county assessor's office with a rolled-up version of Ray's original plot map, a flash drive, and a merger deed signed in triplicate. Blake looked up from his desk, already smiling. "You always come in like it's a chess move." "It is," she said. "Final one." He unrolled the map carefully, smoothing it over the counter with both hands. Margot stood silently as he compared it to the GIS overlay on his screen. The parcels were all there now, merged, clarified, and uncontested. Ellis Trust now owns parcels 347B, 347A, and 346C, he confirmed, tapping at the screen. "You basically own the entire southeast corner of the lake bend." "I don't want fences," Margot said, "but I want the lines documented, publicly." Blake nodded. "This is one hell of a reverse takeover, Ms. Ellis." "Honestly? Never seen one like it." She gave a small smile. "Ray always said planning departments underestimate old women with land surveys." Back at the cabin, Sharon's courier dropped off a final copy of the Unified Landholding Agreement, a thick stack bound in blue legal ribbon. Margot placed it beside Ray's drafting ruler on the mantel. That afternoon, she packed a small thermos, her wool scarf, and a box she hadn't opened in years. The trail to the lake hadn't been shoveled, but she walked it anyway, boots crunching through the snow, breath fogging in rhythmic bursts. She reached the tree stump overlooking the frozen lake, the one Ray used to call their compass point. She set down the box gently, pulled off her gloves, and opened the lid. Inside, Ray's ashes, carefully sealed. A note tucked inside the lid, now yellowed with time. Scatter where it matters, where we built something that lasted. She scattered the ashes slowly, deliberately. The breeze pulled them out over the snow-blanketed lake, soft and quiet. When she was done, she poured a cup of tea, set it beside the stump, and whispered, "The view's ours again." She stayed until the light shifted westward. As she turned to walk back up the trail, a figure stepped out from the tree line. Green parka, ranger badge. It was Hale, one of the few locals who never bought into Dean's stories. "Didn't want to interrupt," he said, voice low. "You didn't." He nodded toward the lake. "Not many people around here fix what they didn't break. You did more than redraw boundaries. You restored the easements. That matters." She looked back once at the tree line. The land just needed to be seen again. As she climbed the ridge, snow crunching under her boots, her phone buzzed in her pocket. A message from Lori. "Package delivered to your porch. Frame's fragile. Don't drop it." The frame was wrapped in newspaper when Margot arrived back at the cabin. She peeled it open gently. Inside, a reprinted topographic parcel map, county-sealed and color-coded, her holdings stitched together in clean, continuous lines. At the bottom, Lori had inscribed a caption in small print, "Ellis Ridge, as it always should have been." Margot set the frame on the wall beside, Ray's photo just above the mantel. Then she picked up her pen, lines reclaimed, ashes scattered. The mountain now answers to its real name. The wind began howling just past midnight, sharp, bitter, and full of intent. Margot had heard that sound before. Not the wind itself, but the pitch it hit when the ridge flexed under snow and the sky pressed down like it was laying claim to the land. Ray used to say storms here didn't arrive. They took the room. By dawn, the power lines had dipped twice, and the chimney's breath curved sideways. The house flickered once, lights dimming, radio warbling, then went black. Margot didn't panic. She didn't curse or grope for flashlights. She walked to the far side of the kitchen, knelt beside the brick panel Ray had installed behind the pantry shelves, and pulled it loose with a short, practiced twist. Behind it, a second flue and a cast-iron stove, matte black, still solid, still waiting. She opened the hatch. Dry, intact, almost reverent in its simplicity. By 8, the scent of baking bread drifted into the front room. She'd used Ray's old sourdough starter, revived last fall, and the iron pot he'd claimed was overkill until winter made it necessary. Outside, the ridge was white. Wind roared past the cabin like a freight train hunting for something to tear loose. But nothing moved, not this time. At 10, someone knocked on the door. She cracked it open to find a woman from 2 cabins down, Bev wrapped in 4 layers and blinking through the blowing snow. "You got heat?" she asked, cheeks flushed. Margot nodded and stepped aside. "Stove's hot. Tea's on." Soon Bev was seated by the fire with a biscuit in hand, socks drying on the hearth. They didn't speak much, just sipped, listened to the wind, and existed. By noon 2 more neighbors came, then a third, a knock, then another. No one asked questions, no one made a scene. Margot kept the kettle full, the biscuits warm, and the silence safe. At one point, a teen boy from the far end of the ridge showed up, tall, underdressed, shovel in hand. He paused on her porch, awkward in the way that only 17-year-olds can be around strong women who've clearly done more with their lives than most men in town ever would. "You want help clearing the path?" he asked, voice cracking just a bit. Margot looked him over. The wind hit the back of his hood and nearly spun him around. "You live down in the hollow?" He nodded. "Why are you up here?" "My mom said you'd have backup heat. People should check on you." Margot almost smiled. Almost. Instead, she stepped aside and handed him a pair of Ray's old gloves. "You shovel the front and side steps," she said. "You earn tea." He grinned. "Deal." He worked the whole hour, then sat beside the stove with wet boots steaming and crumbs on his sleeves. "You live like a queen up here," he said, looking around the room. Margot leaned back in her chair, one hand on her tea, the other resting on the map frame Laurie had sent. "Queens build alone sometimes," she replied. He didn't know what to say after that. Most people didn't. By nightfall, the wind had softened, its rage spent. The others filtered back down the hill, one by one, lanterns bobbing into the snow glow. The teen waved once at the door. "You're good up here?" he asked. Margot nodded. "Better than ever." She shut the door behind him and bolted it. Alone again. But not lonely. She poured herself one more cup and stepped onto the porch. Snow piled along the railing, untouched. She scooped a handful, packed it, and tossed it into the dark. It disappeared without sound. Just like Dean had. The sign was still nailed into the tree when she found it. Splintered at the edge, the paint faded to a sickly ochre. "Kessler Trail," it read. Ray had always hated it. Dean had hammered it in years ago without asking. Just one more way to carve his name into something that wasn't his. Back then, Margot had let it go. Not because she agreed, but because the battle hadn't been worth the breath. Now it was. She pried the sign down with the back of a crowbar, the wood groaning as the rusted nails gave way. She didn't flinch when it cracked in half, just gathered the pieces and carried them to the fire pit behind the cabin. She didn't say a word as she lit it, just watched it burn. By mid-morning, she was in the shed with her brushes, pulling down the last of Ray's supplies, the ones he'd stashed for when we retire and get bored. The new plank was simple, a clean cut of pine, sanded smooth, primed the night before. She painted in silence, steady hand, no stencils, just the name that had waited long enough. Ellis Ridge. That afternoon, Sharon filed the updated designation with the Idaho Forestry Council. It would appear on the next trail map, public, permanent. A week later, the blog post went live. Laurie had set it up for her, a clean, no-nonsense platform titled Notes from the Ridge. Margot's first entry was short, measured, but sharp. Planning even when they don't. "See you coming." They laughed when I asked about easement records. They smirked when I quoted zoning statutes. They shrugged when I bought wood and scoffed when I planted flags. But land listens to the steady hand, and the cold keeps receipts. This ridge was taken without noise, and now it holds its name. M. Ellis. Within 2 days, it had over 8,000 shares. Local news picked it up, then regional outlets, then one of those strange, sharp corners of the internet where policy meets poetry. Her words started trending in places she'd never been, and never cared to go. But it didn't matter, because people were finally seeing what she had built. Laurie called, her voice all buzz and caffeine. "We need to formalize the retreat idea." "What retreat?" "The one people are asking for. Weekend rentals, cabin stays, artist residencies. Women want to come see the ridge that made a man vanish without a sound." Margot laughed, the sound dry but genuine. "There's one cabin. We'll figure it out. I'll handle the logistics. You just keep being the myth." That evening, as snow dusted the path to the road, she carried the new sign up the ridge. It was heavier than it looked, but not by much. She mounted it cleanly where the old one had hung, the fresh bolts gleaming against the bark. A gust of wind came up the slope, cold and direct. She tightened her coat and whispered, "Say my name now." 2 days later, a neighbor caught sight of Dean. He was living out of a battered trailer parked near the edge of the county line, half frozen, tarp-strapped, leaning like it had already given up. The clerk at the co-op said he came in once every 3 days, bought ramen and off-brand whiskey, didn't meet anyone's eyes. No one stopped him. No one helped. His name no longer carried weight. Back at the cabin, Margot framed a print of the North Range Quarterly article Kyle had sent, its title stark and sharp, "When She Took the Land, the Woman Who Redrew the Ridge." Below it hung the new permit, filed under Ellis Preservation Trust, listing the cabin as a seasonal retreat zone. She stepped outside and looked up at the new sign. The wind shifted, caught the edges just right. Ellis Ridge, not just a name, a future. The clinic in Sandpoint still smelled like lemon cleaner and old heating ducts. Margot sat on the wax paper-covered table, boots off, sweater sleeves rolled up, while the nurse clipped a pulse ox to her finger and made pleasant small talk that never required answers. When the doctor came in, a younger woman, brisk and bright, she scanned the tablet and looked up with a smile. "Better than last year," she said. "Strong rhythm, clean scan, low cholesterol. You're aging like someone who doesn't carry stress." Margot almost laughed. "I carry it. I just put it down where it can't find me." The doctor raised a brow but didn't ask. "Keep doing whatever you're doing. Most folks your age don't hike property lines in January." Margot slid her coat on slowly, fingers flexing in the warm sleeves. "Most folks my age never had to draw them." By noon, she was back at the ridge, waiting at the lower gate as the Forest Service truck rolled up, dusting fresh snow in its wake. The man who stepped out was thin and bundled, clipboard tucked tight to his chest. Mid-50s, maybe. Methodical type. Government quiet. "Margot Ellis?" he asked. She nodded. "You're here for the parcel walk?" He gestured to the clipboard. "Easement verification and title condition recheck. County scheduled one last pass before the spring rollovers. Just formalities." They walked the ridge together in silence at first, past the split rail post Ray had installed in '03, down the slope toward the marked trailhead, then along the fire lane where the boundary signs now stood, clean, precise, unfaded. At each marker, he tapped his tablet, logged GPS, cross-referenced the paper deed. About halfway through the circuit, he paused and looked out over the lake, now glassed over in white. The light was low, and the ridge reflected faint gold. "You know," he said, voice low, "this is the cleanest ownership map in the county now. No disputes, no overlaps, no notes." Margot didn't speak for a beat. Then she turned to him. "It wasn't always." He nodded slowly, something respectful in his expression. "Things that get claimed right usually weren't claimed easy." They finished the loop and shook hands at the driveway. "You're cleared. Files closed." Margot watched the truck disappear into the tree line. Back inside, the cabin was warm. Lori had left a note stuck to the fridge with a magnet that said, "Plan. Something wild." Couple from Boise checked out. Left you a review link. 5 stars. Cabin more peaceful than church, cleaner than memory. There was a photo, too. Sunrise through the cabin window, the lake glowing pink. Margot stared at it for a long time, then tucked it under the corner of the fridge frame. She brewed a cup of cinnamon tea and settled into the armchair by the fire, letting the heat kiss her knees and the light crackle across the oak floor. On the table beside her sat Ray's last planner, the one from the year he passed. It was weathered but intact. The leather cover was scuffed, the corners curled, but it still smelled faintly of ink and cedar and effort. She flipped it open. Week 52. Notes in pencil. Double-check culvert grades. Check winterize list. Fix back stair tread. Ask Margot what name we'd give this place if we ever had to. Ellis Ridge? Sounds like a place that could hold its own? She smiled, thumb pressed to the page. Outside, wind shook the trees but didn't reach the glass. For the first time in a long time, Margot didn't need to check the locks, or the calendar, or the boundaries. They were already hers. And the view? It had finally caught up to the truth. The knock came just before noon, soft but certain. Margot opened the door to find the journalist again, not the local kid from the Quarterly, but the woman from Ironwood magazine. Late 30s, long parka, recorder already clipped to her collar. "You still good for the interview?" she asked. Margot stepped aside, nodding once. "Kettle's already on." Inside, the cabin was warm and clean and lived in, no longer a battleground, but a landmark. The fire snapped gently in the hearth, the smell of cinnamon and cedar wood swirling in the air. They sat at the round table by the east window, mugs steaming between them. "I won't rehash what's already been published," the woman said, flipping her notebook open. "I want to know something else. How do you carry this, not the land?" The aftermath. Margot looked out the window. The lake sat still beneath a crust of silver ice. Light flickered across the ridge where the new trail sign caught the sun just right. "I don't carry aftermath," she said slowly. "I carry memory. Different weight." The woman nodded but didn't interrupt. Her recorder blinked red and quiet. "I built this place twice," Margot said after a pause. "Once with him, once without. The first time took sweat, the second took war." The article dropped 3 weeks later. She mapped revenge into the mountain. How one woman turned a boundary dispute into a blueprint for power. It exploded, not just in the Northwest but across forums, blogs, newsletters. Margot's inbox filled overnight. Forest management officials, trail associations, women in law. A writer in Vermont who said, "You didn't just redraw the land. You reminded us we could." Tourists started driving past. Some didn't stop, just slowed, eyes wide as the Ellis Ridge sign came into view. Others parked at the new trailhead and took photos beside the forestry placard with her name on it. Margot never waved. She didn't need to. Her silence was already legend. But the cabin remained hers. Later that month, she pulled on her long wool coat, her scarf, and the boots Ray had bought her that final fall. She walked the boundary one last time, down past the post by the road, up through the thinned tree line, past the rock outcrop where Ray had once pointed and said, "Here, this is where it starts." At the furthest corner, where 3 lines met beneath the shade of a lean birch, Margot crouched. She dug carefully, clearing away snow and frozen needles, until the earth gave just enough to place what she'd carried with her all morning. A small stone, smooth and dark, the initials carved by hand, R+M. She pressed it into place with her gloved palm, firm and final. "I drew the line," she whispered, "but we both held it." On the way back, the sun was dipping low, turning the ridge into amber and fire. She climbed the steps to the cabin just as the first cold wind of dusk reached the porch. Inside, the fire crackled again, steady now, not raging, just enough to hold the night. She poured herself a last cup of tea and sat by the framed map, Ray's photo beside it. Outside, wind stirred through the trees, pulling faint laughter from the pines. And then, as if time itself wanted closure, a single phrase rose from the quiet, old but undefeated. "He said I'd be gone before winter. I stayed." Margot leaned back, her voice no louder than the fire, "and took the view."